Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Mental Health Day. I'm Janet Stearns. I'm the Dean of Students at the University of Miami School of Law. And today I am here as chair of the Law School Committee of the American Bar Association Commission on Lawyer Assistance Programs, which we know as COLAP. COLAP is a coalition of lawyer assistance programs in all of the states in our country. And the LAPs are entities which serve the legal profession, lawyers, judges, and law students. And our mission and our passion is to support people who might be struggling with depression, anxiety, stress, substance use challenges, which might include alcohol or other drugs. And our mission is to try to work with people to provide resources and education, support, treatment around all of these issues with a goal of promoting well-being in the profession. Each fall, we partner with the ABA Law Student Division on the Fall Mental Health Day program, which is one of our many important initiatives. We are really excited about today's program that will enable us to talk honestly about the pandemic and the impact that it has had on all of our lives and our mental health individually, and also the impact that it's had on our profession. So in a moment, I'm going to turn the floor over to the amazing and resilient Lannette Richardson. Lannette is the chair of the ABA Law Student Division, and she is also a law student at Southern University Law Center in Louisiana. She has persevered not only through the pandemic, but through Hurricane Ida, and she continues to be calm and insightful in her leadership. And we are honored that COLAP can partner with her and the Law Student Division in today's program. Lannette, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Katherine, for that wonderful, I think I'm getting some feedback. There you go. That wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. As she mentioned, I'm a student at Southern University Law Center and the chair of the Law Student Division here at the ABA. So I'm very excited to be here. We have a wonderful group of panelists. And so I'm going to offer them an opportunity to speak a little bit about themselves so you can get a familiarity about the panelists and what we'll be discussing as we go on in their areas of expertise. One of our first speaker is Dr. Katherine Bender, Assistant Professor at Bridgewater State University. Hello, Dr. Bender.
Hi, folks. Yes, I'm Kate Bender. I am a counseling professor at Bridgewater State in Massachusetts. And I am the director of our Student Affairs Counseling Program. I've been studying mental health in higher education for quite a bit. And before my tenure as a professor, I worked for the Dave Nee Foundation, who has a mission to promote mental health awareness in the legal profession. And so I've traveled to many law schools to talk about these topics, and I'm excited to be with all of you here today.
Thank you, Dr. Bender. Next, we have Ms. Laura Farber, partner at Hahn & Hahn LLP and co-chair ABA Coordinating Group on Practice Forward.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I am a lawyer. I work predominantly in the employment area and a litigator in a 20-lawyer law firm in Pasadena, California, and I am a ABA bar junkie. I have been involved with the ABA since I was in the Law Student Division, but I became chair of the Young Lawyers Division and have been involved in a variety of other initiatives throughout a long time. I am currently the co-chair of the ABA Coordinating Group on Practice Forward with Bill Bay. And our group was created to deal with the pandemic and to figure out how we could harness the resources in the ABA and come together and help our members figure out how to navigate what's going on with the pandemic and emerging out of the pandemic. We were involved with a survey that two of our other co-panelists were incredibly instrumental in putting together. And I'm so excited to be here with you. And I look forward to this important program on law students and especially on mental health. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And then Roberta Liebenberg, Senior Partner, Fine, Kaplan, and Black and Principal, the Red B Group.
Thank you. And I want to join in how honored and that I am to participate in this really important discussion about the impact of the pandemic and what it's done with respect to well-being and mental health. I am a senior partner at Fine Kaplan and Black. I focus my practice on class actions, antitrust, and white collar criminal defense. I am also, along with Stephanie, principal in the Red B group, which is a women-owned consulting group that uses data-based strategies to help organizations and leaders implement DEI strategies. I'm a former chair of the ABA Commission on Women in the Profession. Like Laura, I have been an ABA junkie, and I have really been passionate about the issues of ensuring that women lawyers and women lawyers of color advance and succeed. Along with Stephanie, we have done a number of really groundbreaking research, including the underrepresentation of women as first chairs at trial, the factors that impact experienced women lawyers, those who've been practicing 15 plus years, to decide whether or not to leave their law firms. And as Laura mentioned just recently, we co-authored the Practice Forward report, which I urge everyone to read because it really focuses on the impact of the pandemic, especially as it impacted women, women with children, and lawyers of color. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And our next panelist is Dr. Stephanie Scharf, partner, Scharf Banks Marmor LLC and principal, also the Red B Group LLC. And I apologize in advance if I mispronounced your last name.
No, you did it perfectly. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. Just a little bit of background on me. I've been practicing law for 35 years, and for about 25 of those years, I was in big law, in 2 different big law firms. And then about 10 years ago, I founded my own law firm, which has become a very prominent women-owned law firm based in Chicago. And along with Bobby, I'm also a principal in the consulting firm called the Red B Group. I started to do research on the legal profession over 15 years ago. It started really when I was the president of the National Association of Women Lawyers, and I had the opportunity to found and also conduct the NAWL annual survey of women in law, and it kind of spread from there. Bobby's mentioned some of the studies that more lately we've done together. And the only other thing I would say, which is one of the reasons I'm very happy to be here, is I live part of the year in Florida, about a half hour north of the law school. So I'm very grateful to be here.
Well, thank you everyone for sharing with us a bit about yourself. So just so everyone who's on the call understands the format of this, we have some questions that were given or shared with us and asked when individuals registered for the event. So that will come a little later, but we do have some discussion questions where we're open. So I will first open with the discussion questions, and this first question, let's see. I'm seeing, I'm looking at the slide deck and seeing where we are. Okay, perfect. Okay, so the first question for discussion, many law students have experienced a lot of stress, anxiety, and isolation since the pandemic started in March 2020. And so are we feeling alone in this? And then that question is for any of the panelists if they want to speak on it. I see that Dr. Bender is off.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I was going to take the lead on that, just about, you know, students are wanting to know, are we alone? What data is out there? And so with my research partners, Dean Jaffe, who I believe is present with us today, and Professor Organ, and through the support of Access Lex, we conducted a study on law students in the spring. Actually, there are a few schools who are still participating now in the fall. And we did that to, we had over 39 schools and a fairly decent response rate from law students. And we did this because we had previously published a survey of law student well-being back in 2016. And at that time, there were about 15 schools that had participated. And so we were wanting to know, have things gotten better? And so I tried to put in red, hopefully it's not too jarring. The U means the updated, that's the one, the most recent data. So in terms of what we see with alcohol consumption, we see that has somewhat decreased since the original survey. We compare some of our data with the Healthy Mind data, which looks not just at law students, but at graduate students in general. And so we're seeing that predominantly we've seen alcohol consumption rates go down. That could be that a lot of times the alcohol consumption takes place during social events, and in the past year, then people were not socializing as much. In terms of use of drug use, we've seen marijuana use increase, but we also recognize that marijuana is legal in many states now, so that could be the reason for it. I do see that law student use of marijuana is still fairly significantly higher than that of graduate students from 2020. That's only master's level students, but for example, you can see that 26% of law students in the prior 30 days reported using marijuana, whereas only 17% of master's level graduate students did. And in terms of prescription drug use, so what we had, the original purpose of conducting the survey that we did in 2014 was because we had heard anecdotally that many law students were perhaps utilizing prescription drugs without a prescription. And so we had researched that and we have updated it. I know this is a little hard to see perhaps with all of the different colors, but so what we are seeing is that students are utilizing prescription drug use without a prescription at lower rates than they had in 2014. So without a prescription is the purple, and without a prescription in 2014 is in the red. We're also seeing that there's an increase in prescription drug use with a prescription. That is the green bar. So perhaps students are seeking more help for mental health issues and therefore getting a prescription. In terms of depression or anxiety diagnosis, our original survey found that 18% of law students had reported a diagnosis of depression in their lifetime. And of those students, 17% said that they were diagnosed since starting law school. In the fall of 2021, we found that 33% reported depression diagnosis in their lifetime, 18% of whom were diagnosed since the start of law school. And the Healthy Mind master's level graduate students, this is from 2020, 26% or 26.6% reported depression. So we can see that while you're not alone, the law students' rate of depression is higher than that of graduate students at the master's level, both for depression as well as anxiety. If you look at the bottom slide, in 2014, we found 21% of law students were diagnosed with anxiety at some point in their life, almost a third of whom had been diagnosed in starting law school. But in our most recent study, we found that 40% have reported that diagnosis. And it looks as though they were diagnosed perhaps earlier than starting law school. And this compares with about 24% of graduate students at the master's level. It's important whenever talking about suicide to provide a suicide prevention lifeline number or resource. If anyone is having thoughts of suicide, 1-800-273-8255. What we found is that suicidal thoughts in the past year have increased for law students. That is probably closely, since there is such a close correlation between feelings of isolation and a sense of not belonging, since those are feelings that are highly correlated with suicidal thoughts, that could account for how many people felt during the pandemic. But in 2014, 20% of students thought seriously about suicide sometime in their life, whereas in this most recent round, almost a third had thought about it sometime in their life. In 2014, only 6% had thought seriously about suicide in the last 12 months. That has raised to 11%. And that compares with the Healthy Minds, again, only master's level graduate students at 8.2% in the past 12 months. That's it on the data. Hopefully I didn't take up too much time. So in terms of, are you alone? No, but perhaps law students are having higher rates of depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts. And we do think that obviously the pandemic exacerbated some of those thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Bender, for sharing that data and information with all of us. It's always helpful to see the data behind it so we can have a better understanding of the scope and severity of the issue. And thank you also for sharing the resources as far as the phone number for anyone that's having suicidal thoughts. It's very important. I will now continue with some of the discussion questions. And at this point, ask Stephanie and Roberta this next question, if they don't mind, which is speaking a little bit about the pandemic and how many of us as law students learned to work from home. Some of us liked it, some of us didn't. And what can we expect in the future as we prepare to interview for summer and permanent jobs?
So two answers to that question. And one I feel strongly about because I know that job seeking can be very anxiety provoking. And I believe there will be more jobs than ever for lawyers, not just in law firms, but not-for-profits, government, businesses. And the jobs are also not shrinking outside the law. Lawyers are
Stephanie, I don't want to interrupt you, but do you have a headset that you might be able to use? There is some background noise that's making it a little difficult to understand you.
Is this better?
Oh, that's much better. Thank you so much.
I actually increased my volume. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
But what I was saying is, I think there will be a lot of jobs, whether it's in the law or outside the law, because lawyers are considered very desirable job candidates. People think that they think well, they follow up, they're good with systems, they're good in groups. So I'm optimistic generally about the prospects for what happens after law school. Now, with respect to remote working, I think there is a great unknown about that because my impression in doing some studies and also talking to a lot of people that entities such as firms or businesses that employ lawyers are still struggling with whether to allow people to work at home all the time, part of the time, none of the time, what of the time. Tech companies are a little bit different because they are often more typically allowing remote working. But I think that not only is it unknown whether there will be remote working, but for women and lawyers of color, there are pros and cons. Yes, it can be less stressful than working in the office, but it can also be more stressful without the boundaries between home and work that happen when you work from home. And there's also the danger of falling off the company radar screen and not getting the recognition or the opportunities to grow and advance, or the benefit of the informal hallway conversations where you learn and are recognized and are acknowledged and actually are known. And all of those factors are important to framing careers. So I don't think there is one right answer to will remote working happen? I think there's going to be a lot of thinking about it from employers. And I don't think there's one right answer about whether you should be looking for a remote job. I do think it's wise to be aware of the ways in which remote work can benefit you and your life, and also the ways in which it may cut into your life even, but certainly into your career.
And Lannette, I'll jump in. First, I want to put in perspective some of the data that Dr. Bender spoke about. Because interestingly, in a May 2021 Krill study, the researchers actually found that women lawyers were engaging in more binge drinking than men, which was a statistic that was sort of interesting to me. I don't think it was one that I expected, but I think it really complements what women lawyers were going through in terms of trying to juggle both their professional obligations and their personal, and the 24/7 that lawyers seem to be engaged in. So just I thought that was interesting juxtaposition. Another, and we're going to talk about this from the Practice Forward study, but in terms of anxiety, stress, and depression, clearly women, and especially lawyers of color, were experiencing jaw level levels of anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts. And Dr. Bender, you should take a look at the ALM, mental health and substance abuse study, which really showed that lawyers of color reported extreme higher levels of suicidal thoughts, depression, and isolation compared to their white colleagues. And nearly 61% of Black attorneys reported feeling isolated and unsupported by their firms. With respect to remote work, I think it's really interesting because I am a firm believer that we need complete structural changes in legal organizations. And I think the pandemic has offered this opportunity and the benefits that came with remote work, and in particular, that lawyers remain productive, remained efficient. And if you look at surveys of law students, 60% of them want to have some type of flexibility in their where they work in terms of going back to the office. Only 3% of law students wanted to work in the office 5 days a week. And that actually correlated with the findings that we found, that our findings from Practice Forward. So I think that this law students are actually in a much better position than what happened in the 2009 recession, because there is a war for talent right now. And so I think that if you have the opportunity to think about where you want to work, how you want to work, what is the culture of the law firm or legal organization, those are important issues. And I think legal organizations are going to have to be truly innovative. They're going to have to be really creative in trying to address the really important issues Stephanie raised about how do you get trained? How do you make sure you're not out of sight, out of mind? But that doesn't mean that we always have to do it the same old way. We need to start thinking about what are the different types of structures that we can put in place that can help to promote hybrid working and to give people really more opportunities for work-life balance, which will make them actually better lawyers.
Thank you so much, Roberta, for that. That's actually a perfect segue into this next question. And just briefly, before this panel, we had, and by we, I mean the LSD Council, had a networking event where a lot of the questions that some of my peers were bringing up had to do with working, future employment, and internships. So the question I have for Dean Jaffe and Roberta then is, if we are experiencing stress, anxiety, and depression, how open should we be about discussing this with future employers? And how can we expect them to respond to our mental health needs? Like, what accommodations will they make for us?
Dean Jaffe, I don't know if you want to start.
I would be happy to. I'm kind of split on this. My view on this decision, and I think I'm paraphrasing or quoting Yogi Berra or somebody else, but it's a version of, I wouldn't want to belong to a club that wouldn't have me as its member. If I'm interviewing with a law firm, that is going to, blow me off or look the other way because I'm raising questions about mental health, maybe not even my own, but just what a law firm is doing about it, and they kind of balk at that, then maybe that law firm isn't ready to have me as the talented individual that I am. Having said that, I very much respect and appreciate that with, growing debt and the interest of students finding employment, that's a tough conversation to have. Groucho Marx, thank you. Somebody just pointed out. Sorry, Groucho. And I'm a big Marx Brothers fan too. I apologize. Employment's also important. And so one could, I think, make an equal argument. I would hate to ever see an applicant or a student kind of hide a mental health issue, but one could make the argument that they could kind of work their way around it carefully, do their own due diligence in terms of what a firm may be doing around well-being through chatting with other associates, looking on the website, maybe get the position and then work from within. The culture is going to eventually change among law firms. It's going to take some time. There's some great work being done by a number of them, but that number has to increase. And so it's a little bit of a careful walk. And I guess I would encourage any student who's thinking about this individually to meet with their dean of students and or somebody in their career services office and have just kind of a real deep dive and a conversation about how to best approach that in their individual circumstance.
I echo that advice. I think this is sort of a delicate needle to thread. And I think, as in any type of job interview, you need to do your due diligence. And one thing that has happened during the pandemic is that many legal organizations actually spent a lot of resources trying to build up wellness and mental health and have a lot of resources available. And in fact, again, another significant finding from our survey was that 44%, especially of women lawyers, wanted these type of wellness resources. And they also, 81% obviously, wanted more parental resources. So talking to associates, talking to others in the law firm, that's actually the best way you're going to find out about the culture of a law firm. And then I think it may not be the first question out, but I think if in fact this is a firm that you are really serious about going and you've been through several of the interview process, you may want to inquire further about it. But again, I mean, I think you're going to have to sort of feel that out. It wouldn't be my first question out of the box, though, in an interview.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's really good advice. And the next question we'll ask Laura. Can you share with us a bit about your data on the impact of the pandemic on lawyers of historically underrepresented group? And what does this data tell us about ongoing advocacy efforts? What is the ABA doing?
Sure. The survey that the Red Bee Group conducted with Practice Forward basically reflected the need for effective diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. When asked, 47% of lawyers of color said that they feel stress at work at least sometimes on account of race or ethnicity. 19% feel stress very often or almost all the time. And then you have the double bind of race and gender. So clearly, this is an issue. Interestingly, 7% of white lawyers feel stress at work at least sometimes on account of race or ethnicity. Women and lawyers of color much less optimistic about the legal profession generally. And so the question is, are we positioned, is a legal profession positioned to reflect and maintain that diversity, including women lawyers and lawyers of color, by the changes that they will need to make sure that they are implementing effective strategies to deal with this information, this data, which is out there, and attracting and retaining those lawyers, which I think is also important. A few steps that we've taken with Practice Forward, and by the way, you need to go to our website to see the survey and see the content. There's all kinds of really great checklists and resources. As ABA, you want to go to the website, the main ABA website, but also make sure and go into the Practice Forward information. You'll find terrific data and resources. But something else that we've been working on are resolutions in the House of Delegates. So let me share a little bit about that. At mid-year meeting last year, we passed 2 resolutions. One was on lobbying and helping legal employers focus on resources for childcare and family care, because that is a predominant issue falling on women and parents of young children. And the other resolution was resources dealing with mental health and well-being and stigma. And that was one of the few resolutions that was unanimously adopted by the entire House. I have been in the House for quite a while, and I have rarely ever seen no single nay vote, which spoke volumes about the need to focus on mental health and well-being, and making sure that resources are available, that employers follow that, as well as law schools and law students, of course, to assist law students, and courts and judiciary and all the other systems within our legal profession, identifying those resources and working with COLAP, for example, and the local COLAPs on that issue. We also have other resolutions that we just adopted at our annual meeting dealing with re-entry into the workplace. And some of the topics that you heard Bobby and Stephanie touch on, how to make that transition, but also hybrid arrangements, and making sure that there are resources and the ability to do that. That was one of the resolutions, and the other dealt with the disproportionate impact during the pandemic on lawyers of color, and what resources and steps and programs need to be put in place to address those particular deficiencies. Other ones that we have in the mix in the pipeline, we're working with the Center for Professional Responsibility on adding to one of the rules on professional conduct, the definition of competence, to include mental health and well-being. We think that is crucial and important. 3 states currently do that: California, Virginia, and Vermont. And we'd like to see more states pursue that. And also, hopefully, we're working on, depending on how we get our partners together, potentially a resolution encouraging courts on non-dispositive civil matters, case management conferences and motions, to allow for remote proceedings to take place. So many do that now, but to encourage this post-pandemic, because we are going to hopefully have a post-pandemic. We're not there now, but at some point we think we're going to have that. And what is it going to look like, both for law firms and for our court system and our justice system? Important things to focus on. The other things that I also wanted to bring up briefly is with the section of legal education. They have and are going to be bringing some resolutions that deal with well-being practices for students. And with a focus on law student well-being resources, which need to be out there. And so getting the section of legal education to pursue these resources and encouraging those law schools to provide them, and to deal with stigma, and making sure, for example, students in need of critical services such as food pantries or emergency financial assistance are knowing where to go to get that, or resources that can include counseling provided in-house by the law school, through the university where the law school's a part, or by a lawyer assistance program, or law students striving to mitigate barriers or the stigma that I mentioned to accessing the services, things of that nature. And we're hopeful that those resolutions will pass.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Laura, for that information. And before we get into the questions, this is going to be our last pre-selected question, but before we get into the questions that came in during registration, I'm hoping to hear from each of our panelists about one concrete thing that each of you does for your own personal well-being and how you find time to do it. So we'll start with Roberta, and then we'll go in the order of my screen, so there's no confusion.
Thanks, Lannette. I think I guess my best piece of advice, and something that I do, is to reach out to those in my network. And Stephanie Sharp is one person that I speak to all the time. Laura is another. And I think it's really helpful to know that you're not alone, that these are experiences that we're all going through, that they're hopefully going to pass, but just to voice that concern, just to have the opportunity to explain what you're anxious about, I think is really helpful. And my other something that I'm trying to perfect is trying to say no, and trying to delegate more, and not worrying about whether you have the perfect house or the perfect meal, but really trying to be more empathetic to yourself and to exercise self-care.
Thank you, Roberta. Dr. Bender?
I think what strikes me about this question is says like, how do you find the time? And I recently read from a researcher who said, I don't find it, I make it, I create the time. And so I think for me, I'm very intentional in my schedule and create time for exercise or doing the New York Times crossword, which takes more time on a Sunday than it does any other day. But basically being intentional and protective of that time. And I think for law students, something that I would really like to emphasize is that you have access to free counseling services. And just like you go to a medical doctor every year for a physical to kind of be preventive, I would encourage you to utilize some of those counseling services. It doesn't need to be when you are in an emergency situation that you first reach out to a mental health counselor. And that's, I think, could be a really great example of self-advocacy and self-care.
Thank you, Dr. Bender. And Stephanie?
So I'm going to sound similar to Dr. Bender and to Bobby. I actually schedule free time in my calendar because I noticed when I don't schedule it, then everything gets filled up. So I schedule blocks of time, not every day, but almost every day, where I do not have to do anything. And sometimes that's what happens. I don't do anything. I also make sure, or try to make sure that once every 2 weeks for a morning, I do something outside my house that I like. So I happen to like vintage furniture. So I go to secondhand stores and I look at them, just even if it's one store.
Stephanie, your static is back.
Uh-oh. All right. So, and I guess the third thing I would say is I try to exercise in a class, a Zoom class, 3 times a week. I'm not perfect about it, but even if I skip a class, I don't apologize. I just start up again and do it. So those 3 things help.
Thank you. And Laura?
Well, I think that as lawyers and even as law students, we're so focused on solving everyone else's problems that we don't focus on ourselves. We're helping everybody around us and say, well, wait a minute, what about me? I'm kind of low man on the totem pole, or woman on the totem pole. And that needs to change. You need to prioritize these things, and not just as a law student or as a lawyer, but as a human being. I mean, these things are important, and self-care is something that I've been able to learn a lot about. Importantly, pre-pandemic, actually. I had an opportunity to be in a position where I was away from the office and I was traveling and doing other things. And I learned that when I got my 7 hours of sleep, and that was my goal, or when I, ate well and I did my steps, I got my little rewards with my, on my Apple Watch or whatever, but, making sure that I'm making this part of my routine, I felt better. I had more energy. My hair got thicker. I mean, just all kinds of fun things, but I truly believe that it makes a difference, and talking about it. And when I'm feeling down, talking about it. Don't be shy about it. Have people to reach out to. That mental health is hugely important. So those things were important in my life.
Thank you, Laura. Dean Jaffe?
I will give 6 words of advice. I think it's 6 words, depending on the first one. Facebook is not the real world. And this is not meant to decry any students who are listening to this. I love all of you, but too much of this generation is seeing on social media what they believe is supposed to be their lives. I'm in Trinidad, or I'm having the best hamburger, or look at me flying from here to there. Rarely are you going to find an individual who says, I'm really having a tough day today. It'd be great if somebody would reach out and give me, a hug of support or something of support, because that's not the way the world's operating right now. And that's unfortunate. Make sure you're lining up your lives with your reality, and make sure your life is yours and that you're owning it, and that you're surrounded by good and caring people, and let the Facebookers of the world, sometimes who probably should be doing some other things, be left for other times, and maybe some light moments, but not too much of your days and too much of your weeks. And for me, I've had 2 growing teenagers, and I know that I'm going to lose them to life at some point in time. So I just do my best to spend as much time as I can with my girls while I can.
But then you get grandchildren.
Right. Ojalá.
Thank you, Dean Stearns. Or thank you, Dean Jaffe. Dean Stearns.
Well, okay, Lannette is now cold calling on all of us, so this is becoming fun. But I am glad we're talking about our own person, because I think we have to lead by example. And I want to also say that as we've heard, and as I talk to my 1L students in orientation, I think we can take control of our lives. And as I say, schedule for the big rocks, for the really big goals and the things that are important to us. And you can do it in law school. And by doing it in law school, you will learn how to do it in the real world. Because actually the real world doesn't get easier than law school. It actually gets harder than law school. So I believe the most important thing we can actually teach you in law school is how to figure out these balance points between your obligations and taking care of yourself. So as you've heard here, I absolutely agree. I schedule. This morning, it was on my calendar at 7 a.m. to go to yoga, and I did it because it was on my calendar, and it has left me calmer for the rest of this entire day. And I agree. This is what I do, and this is what I need to do to take care of myself, so I can take care of all my students and all the people around me.
Okay, thank you everyone for sharing that. As I mentioned before, we had some questions that were submitted via the registrants. However, there is a question that came in from someone who was in attendance during the session. So I'll ask that question, and whoever would like to answer it is free to answer it. The question is, how are views toward mental health conditions changing in regard to admission to the bar? And this person says that I am aware that New York removed a question on this matter in its bar application, but is there a general consensus on this issue?
So I'll say a word on this, Lannette. I'm glad we were asked the question, because I think it is a critically important question, and actually one on which Dean Jaffe and I and others through the COLAP have been doing a lot of work in recent years. And let me say this, I think one of the many gifts of the pandemic, and I do believe that there are gifts of this last 18 months, is that not only New York, but in fact 4 states, Michigan, Indiana, and New Hampshire, removed their questions on substance use and mental health during the year of the pandemic. This didn't just happen. This is a result of a lot of legal work and advocacy by people who are extremely concerned that the bar's character and fitness process both has violated ADA law and has discouraged our students from seeking the help that they need when they need it. And so I think it's a critical question. I think, and Dean Jaffe and I wrote an article on this in the last couple of years. I think that there is not perhaps a consensus quite yet, but I think that there is some momentum in the right direction. I think that there is room for more advocacy with the National Conference of Bar Examiners that has got questions that are used in about half of the states in our country around substance use and mental health. And I think that there is the opportunity for more advocacy in other states that have not yet followed New York's lead. And so I would say that for me, one of the many benefits of my ABA involvement over these last few years is I've been very truly empowered to be connected with so many great advocates across the country. And I would say this continues to be a very important priority project for the COLAP Law School Committee. And I would certainly welcome others on this call who might want to join our efforts.
And I would just add to that very briefly, because Janet nailed all of it. There is, whether or not that question came from a student, there is so much power in you as students and student leaders, not just to advocate, but to make this change happen. And if I'm not, it may be the most recent, but if I'm not mistaken, the University of Kentucky Law School Student Bar Association was the most recent body that I had seen in the news that was advocating for change of their state Supreme Court. And I haven't seen whether the change occurred yet, but there is power in your voices. And so come together as student leaders, whether it's at the national or your individual law school level, and say, we insist on change. And Dean Stearns has a packet of information that she can send you, I can send to you. There are others that she said who are involved, but we've got kind of a ready to go. If you're ready to push this button, we're ready to kind of stand beside you, get in the boat with you, help with the rowing, whatever it takes. Do not underestimate the value that you have to help change in this regard.
Okay, and Dean Stearns, you'll appreciate this. So all of the questions going forward are free for all. So whoever would like to answer, and there's no more cold calling, whoever would like to ask them, feel free to answer it. So this next question is, how should law students navigate a recent diagnosis? Example being ADHD, anxiety, bipolar disorder in law school.
Well, the most, as Dr. Bender pointed out, you have access at nearly every law school in this country to counseling services on your campus, referral networks. The best thing that you can do in law school is access these resources and begin to learn how to manage for yourself getting treatment, whether it's therapy, whether it's medication, whether it is, other alternative strategies, and then starting to see how you can react and experience to the pressures of law school while you're in law school. Use every opportunity to learn about yourself and self-care. And the better that you can begin to manage these, the better able you will be to transition into the profession. And what you're hearing from these fabulous lawyers who are talking to you is that I think the profession is more open to accommodating, but you still have to be able to figure out how to show up and get the job done and meet deadlines and deal with the nervousness of your, talking to a partner or talking to a judge. You want to learn as much as you can in law school and not think, and I know many students tell me this, that not accessing the help it was going to somehow magically push this problem down the road to another time.
And I would quickly add to that, if you don't want to do it for all the powerful reasons that Dean Stern said, do it for an additional practical one. We just now, as part of Wellness Week today, completed a live webinar on the bar exam. And the portion that I spoke to was accommodations. You are virtually guaranteed, if you do not seek and receive accommodations in law school, not to receive them on the bar exam. If you don't have a track record, they're going to say whether you were an A, a B, or a C student, you got through law school, you'll get through the bar exam, thank you very much, without the accommodation. So if you did it for no other reason than in anticipation of the bar, that is going to be valuable in and of itself.
And I would like to add, there is nothing shameful whatsoever about asking for accommodations. Sometimes people have cognitive conditions or whatever sort of condition it is, and they feel they want to hide it. There's nothing wrong with asking for accommodations. You can get accommodations in law schools, you say, and should. You can get accommodations on tests before and after law school, and you should. And you can sail through to have a very productive legal career.
Thank you all for that. Our next question is, what can we do to assist with highlighting these issues across generational divides?
Sorry, I want to say wait it out, and that's not the answer that the questioner is looking for. I'm going to share, forgive me, I'm going to share, I'll try to make this a very quick story. I was honored a couple of years ago to sit on a panel of a number of tables with lawyers, which was a subset of a conference. And this was directed by the ABA president to look at law firms and help them assist how they were trying to overcome some of these issues around well-being. And a senior partner at my table, which I was moderating and hosting, said, well, let me give you an example of what we're doing. We had a happy hour last week, and I have my own issues about happy hours, but it's one way for firms to get together, so be it. And she proceeded to say, I had 2 associates on a team with me, and I emailed them and said, I expect you're going to be at the happy hour, right? And they said, yeah, of course, of course, of course. And one showed up and one didn't. So the next day I emailed the one who didn't and said, where were you? And he emailed back to me and said, I forgot my daughter had a soccer game, so I went to the soccer game instead. And the partner looked at me and said, and there you go. And the and there you go was, how dare they leave the firm and go with their daughter to a soccer game when we were making this effort around well-being to have a happy hour. Now, I don't mean to say that across the board. There are clearly senior partners in firms that are getting this. I think as law professors who are coming through law school that are more supportive are indoctrinating and being more encouraging of students in law school about that, that message is going to come across. But I also think it goes back to the earlier question about what do I do when I'm applying to law firms? And I'd say to those of you in the top, 5-10% who are maybe going the private route and have 10, 15 interviews and are going to have the pick of the litter and callbacks and everything else, I would say make this a point of your questions. Say, this is important to me, and I think it ought to be important to you as a law firm. They're going to start to hear this, and it's going to start to resonate. It's going to start to grow, but it's going to take time. We're getting there, but it's going to take time. This movement is relatively young at the end of the day.
And I would jump in and add that there were a lot of significant downsides about the pandemic, but I do think one of the upsides of the pandemic is that people actually were more empathetic, and leaders were more intentional about the types of communications and really concerned about the well-being of their lawyers. And I think what we really need to do is to ensure that going forward, those lessons learned about the importance of well-being, the importance of burnout, the importance of needing to have a break, have to be implemented into real policies and strategies. So for example, if you don't decrease billable hour requirements and say to people, oh yes, you can take more vacation or time off, they won't, because they can't meet their billable hour requirements. If you say to people, yes, you can have flexibility, but if I send you an email at 2:00 at night, I want to make sure I get a response. That's also a mixed message. So having really defined, transparent boundaries about when communications happen, when meetings happen, when you can take your daughter to soccer and why that should be encouraged. Those are the kinds of things that will really, I think, increase the well-being and mental health of everyone, lawyers, staff, everyone.
I want to add a couple things too, if I can. First of all, there is a well-being pledge that I know was put in place a while back that a lot of law firms have signed on. So I think that's one place where you can ask the question, if you don't want to do what Dean Jaffe suggested, which is a great suggestion, or don't feel comfortable, you can at least see if the firms that you're looking at maybe signed on to this pledge, which basically says they're committed to well-being and pursuing those resources and implementing them. But the other thing I want you to think about is you don't all have to work at large law firms. And there are a lot of work settings where this is important and it is prioritized. And there's an opportunity to deal with, well-being, because the firm itself is involved in its community and values that involvement. And so maybe it's not that we all have to look for those big firm jobs. And I know that law schools, and I'm going to say this because I went to one and had the same experience. The bias is to push law students into big law firms. You don't all have to work at a big law firm coming out of law school. So look at alternatives and explore other work environments that may fit better, that may be a really good opportunity for you to work in an environment where you're not settling, you're not working and burning the midnight hour. You don't have to do FaceTime and walk around at 7 p.m. to show everybody you're available for work, even though you have no work to do and you could leave the office at that time. Whatever the rule is, and this is not saying that big law firms aren't fabulous. I started at one and I lasted for 2 years, and I could not see myself permanently staying in that kind of a work environment. And so I encourage you all to explore alternative options and to know that there's more out there in addition to those that may have, certain rules or approaches that don't fit into what you're looking for.
Thank you all for sharing your thoughts on that. I want to be mindful of time and ask if there are any final thoughts that our panelists like to share, or any other questions that they know that they see from those that were submitted that they really want to answer before we wind down.
I think I saw a question about, how do we know what sort of normal behavior, and how do we know if this is, something that's interfering with, and I guess that's a question I would get frequently from law students. And what I would say is, first of all, when you all only talk to one another, you start to normalize behavior that is not necessarily normalized in other populations. So pulling all-nighters and not eating, and that's not necessarily healthy behavior that we want to be endorsing. And so what I often say, there are 3 phrases: work, play, love, frequency, intensity, duration. So if any of symptoms like feeling anxious, feeling sad, if any of that is interfering with your ability to work, your ability to play, or your ability to love, as in your relationships, then talk to someone. And also, just like you call a doctor and say, for 3 days, I've had a cough and a fever, I think it's time to make an appointment. Monitor any symptoms that seem, unusual. Shortness of breath, feeling chest pain, feel like the world is closing in, like some sort of anxiety symptoms. Monitor the frequency, the intensity, and the duration of the disturbed sleep or anything. And we typically say a period of 2 weeks or more, you should seek help. But I know how exacting law students are. If you've had 13 days of not sleeping, and then on the 14th day you sleep and say, "Oh, good, I'm good, I don't need to see someone," I would challenge you a bit there.
So I just want to say that this has been a fabulous Mental Health Day program. In fact, the Mental Health Day, the International Mental Health Day, is this Sunday, October 10th. And my challenge to each and every person, including our panelists and everyone listening, is to do something this weekend for your own well-being, whatever that looks like. It could be golf, it could be furniture shopping, it could be gardening, but do something for your well-being this weekend. And we do try to build the energy and momentum and encourage people to use just a little bit of social media. And I've given you 2 hashtags, Law Student Wellness and hashtag ABA Mental Health. And this is how we continue to build our national movement. And I thank everybody for taking this really important issue so seriously.
Thank you, Dean Stearns. And thank you to all of our panelists again for sharing your insight and a little bit of how you take care of yourselves as well, and the resources and the data. I feel like this was a very powerful hour. And so we're all very thankful. And as Dean Stearns mentioned, she in the chat has shared with us a couple of hashtags, hashtag Law Student Wellness and hashtag ABA Mental Health, that we can share this weekend. I know Dean Jaffe mentioned no overloading on social media, but let's find a balance so that we can encourage one another on social media this weekend. So I thank you all again, and take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Have a good one.
And thank you, Lannette, for
Thank you,
being
Lannette.
moderating.
Stay well.
We really appreciate it. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.